Recent long-standing conflicts in Iraq have reduced a complex, historically significant country to a land riddled with ecological and political catastrophes. 9 primary ethnic groups call the land home, and Iraq is home to diverse wildlife and a formerly vibrant geography. However, when Iraq came into a de facto dictatorship, the government began enacting ecocide to punish its own people. Unfortunately, the massive ecological destruction of Iraqi marshlands was the beginning of the long and tragic history of ecological political collapse of one of the most historically significant regions in human history. Join us as we explore how the land that helped create modern society has fallen into a state of post-apocalyptic ruin. Can we do anything to reverse the damage caused by the Iraqi ecocide? The marshlands of Mesopotamia. When you look at some areas of Iraq today, you'll see wilted greenery, cracked earth, flaming oil fields, trash-littered waterways, and bomb-scarred landscapes. But it wasn't always like this. In fact, Iraq was home to one of the most prominent and important civilizations in human history. Iraq used to be known as Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was called the land between 2 rivers, the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. The region encompassed all of present-day Iraq, and it extended northwest into Syria and up into southeastern Turkey. Without Mesopotamia, the world could have been a very different place. Mesopotamia is where the wheel was invented, writing styles were born there, and mathematics and other sciences were also advanced by the Mesopotamian society. Evidence shows that the Zagros mountain range in Mesopotamia was where the first cereal crops were grown. Cereal crops are any plants grown for seeds and used for food. The first farms brought dramatic changes to humanity. For the first time in history, humans could leave their hunter-gatherer nomadic lifestyles behind and develop farms. With farms came food surplus, and thus the foundation of modern civilization was born. What made this land so perfect for humans? Well, the rivers both played important roles, and the land between them was also very geographically unique. The Euphrates is the longest river in Western Asia. It stretches from Turkey down to the Persian Gulf. Many small cities were built along the tributaries of the Euphrates, which gave rise to some of the diverse subcultures in the region. The Tigris was a vital part of transportation in Mesopotamia that allowed drier desert regions to thrive thanks to trade with the marshlands. Since then, large-scale dams have been built on both rivers, causing many of the ancient tributaries to dry up completely, changing the landscape forever. The water quality has also plummeted due to a number of ecological disasters. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates was known as the Mesopotamian marshes, or the Iraqi marshes today. The Iraqi marshes are wetlands, ecosystems that undergo periods of flooding or remain partially flooded for years. The marshland drainage disaster. The Iraqi marshland is also home to a unique subculture known as the Marsh people, or Ma'adan. However, the Marsh people are one of the primary casualties of the ongoing political and ecological crisis in Iraq. In 1991, the Iraq uprising started as Shiites and Kurds rebelled against the dictator Saddam Hussein. To punish the Marsh people for their role in the uprising, the Iraqi government drained the Mesopotamian marshes. The fascist regime created a disinformation campaign stating that they were diverting the Tigris and Euphrates to exterminate a breeding ground for mosquitoes and to reclaim land for agricultural use, even though the marshes were already used for their unique agriculture. The drained lands forced over 200,000 people to relocate. They lost their homes and their very way of life. The draining of the marshlands killed thousands of waterfowl and fish, and it caused multiple animal species to move from safe to threatened status as they neared possible extinction. For example, the Maxwelli smooth-coated otter, the Levant darter, and the Bunn's short-tailed bandicoot rat are all almost gone from the planet. The salt content of the soil and water increased dramatically, which meant fishing, rice farms, and even dairy production were no longer possible in the area. The drainage disrupted migration paths for birds that traveled between Eurasia and Africa, reducing bird populations in the area and the surrounding countries, with bird populations dropping all the way up to Ukraine. The ecocide of the marshlands caused the desertification of over 7,500 square miles of land, and the desertification continues to grow to this day. The marshland drainage completely destroyed the central Kurna marshes, no longer classified as a wetlands ecosystem. Even as irreversible damage was being inflicted on the Ma'aden people, the Iraqi government continued to win supporters for this plan through the use of propaganda. Villages that tried to stand up to the ecocide were burned, vehicles were destroyed, freshwater supplies were poisoned, and thousands of people were killed. There was once 500,000 marsh people in Iraq in the 1950s. Today, there may be only 20,000, while only a tenth of the population still live the traditional lifestyle for which the region was known. Politics and war ravage of the marshlands. The United Nations has treaties in place to protect countries from this type of genocidal warfare, but they turned a blind eye to Iraq, even though the country signed a UN treaty that should have granted them protection. The treaty was first issued by the UN at the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in 1948. Iraq agreed to the terms when it became effective in 1951. The United States invaded Iraq in 2003 under the contentious pretense that Saddam's regime had acquired weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs. The world rejected the US aggression, and Rome held the largest anti-war rally in history, with over 3 million attendees. The US demanded regime change and told the world that removing Saddam from power would restabilize the region and help the Iraqi people. Chemical weapons classified as WMDs were found in Iraq, but the strength and effectiveness of the weapons may not have justified the US occupation. To further hurt the cause of the United States, the Iraqi dictatorship was shown to have no ties to the organizations responsible for the attacks on September 11. Since then, international opinion on the war in Iraq has remained a hot-button issue, as some believe the war was illegal. Saddam's regime was guilty of atrocious human rights violations, extending far beyond the marshland drainage. However, experts said that the state-sponsored genocide of the Iraqi people was not reaching levels that justified military intervention. The newly formed Iraqi government and members of the marshland removed many of the malicious drainage structures that decimated their land. By the early 2000s, some small lakes started to form in the desiccated landscape. By 2008, 75% of the marshlands had been restored to functional ecosystem levels. But the total area was still 58% smaller than it was before the ecocide. New dams constructed by Turkey and Iran upstream from the Gulf cut the remaining marshlands by 30% and threatened to reduce the already smaller marshland by another 20% in the coming years. As Iraqi cities became more technologically advanced and urbanized, the Iraqi government began processing water from the Tigris for city drinking water, which also reduced the flow rate to the marshlands. Climate change, oil, and the scars of war. Tragically, Saddam's drainage scheme wasn't the only ecocide inflicted on the Iraqi marshlands. Climate change has also dramatically impacted the wetlands of Iraq. Higher temperatures cause more water to evaporate, and less rainfall means the wetlands aren't replenished as often. Since the turn of the century, rainfall in Iraq has reduced by 9%, and it's expected to drop by another 9% by 2050. The average temperature has only raised 1 degree Fahrenheit, but that's enough to cause droughts in Iraq and its neighboring countries, which all impacts the water levels of the rivers and their drainage basins. On top of fertilizer pollution, actual sewage continues to be pumped into the Euphrates and Tigris, further eroding the water quality and destroying the ecosystem of the marshlands. The Iraqi oil industry also contributes to water and air pollution, which further harms the ecosystem. The US may have helped destroy the drainage dams, but they also caused lasting harm. It's estimated that the war in Iraq generated 11 million pounds of toxic waste like uranium and dioxin, and the US simply left the waste in Iraq, where it continues to wreak havoc on the Ma'aden people and their land. In 2016, more fighting in Iraq led to the burning of mineral stockpiles and the destruction of water reserves that brought clouds of black toxic smoke choking out the sunlight over large areas for days. Iraq's multiple sources of toxicity have led to increases in birth defects and rising mortality rates. In the early 2000s, childhood leukemia rates in some regions rose to an alarming 60%, while cancer rates in the overall population rose as high as 40 times that of the rates of the 1990s. While the damming of the rivers led to massive reservoirs that should help the people of Iraq, the high temperatures caused by global warming create high evaporation rates of 1.2 cubic miles per year, which further threatens to upend the stability of the Iraqi marshlands. As the once lush and vibrant landscape turns into a dry desert, there have been increases in dust or sandstorms, which makes life difficult and also harms wildlife and the ecosystem. The sandstorm problem didn't decrease even after the regime change partially revitalized the marshlands. In 1990, there were 24 sandstorms on average, but 122 on average as of 2013. Hope for the marshlands. Is it possible to reverse the damage done to the Iraqi marshlands and save the marsh people and their diverse and storied ecosystem? The International Committee of the Red Cross, or ICRC, started a program in 2020 to install 8 reverse osmosis water treatment facilities in Iraq. These units use solar power to reduce energy expenditure and pollution, and the 8 facilities can provide clean water to 20,000 people. Wetlands advocacy groups have worked with the Shell Oil Company to ensure that oil fields have minimal impact on the environment, and the company has said that it will avoid building new fields that could harm the wetlands. Some scientists have shown that reflooding some of the arid desert regions could jumpstart the ecosystem back to life and improve biodiversity, even in the worst impacted regions. In recent years, hundreds of thousands of plants and fish have been regrown or repopulated in the Iraqi marshlands. Over 10,000 hectares of farmland have been recovered. The US Agency for International Development, or DAI, also established the Iraqi Marshlands Restoration Project, which had notable results in the early 2000s. Many advocacy groups and individuals within Iraq are trying to educate the population and lobby for better environmental protection from the government. But war for the marshlands and the safety of the Iraqi ecosystem is still ongoing. So that's the story of how the ecocide in Iraq is killing its land and its people. What do you think we should do to help the marsh people? How can we save the land once known as Mesopotamia? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe for more geopolitical videos coming soon.